A Brief History of Roman Empire. Written by Stephen Kershaw. Chapter 1, External Expansion, Internal Implosion, Part 1. Trojans, Kings and Republicans. The history of the Romans stretches well in excess of a millennium on even the shortest calculation, and their mythology extends the time frame even further. They traced their origins back to Troy via the mythical Trojan prince Aeneas, who escaped from the carnage inflicted by the Greeks after they had used the trick of the wooden horse. He and a small band of survivors made their way to Italy, where they fought and then united with the native inhabitants to form the future Roman race. Legend has it that the city of Rome was founded by Romulus in 753 BCE and was then ruled by 7 kings until 510 BCE, when the populist but tyrannical king Tarquinius Superbus was expelled by Brutus the Liberator. Rome became a republic the year after, and the Romans always remained acutely sensitive to the difference between a kingdom, regnum, and a republic, res publica, literally, the public thing. During the Republican period, 509–27 BC.A., when the government was theoretically controlled by elected magistrates, Rome gradually became the dominant power in Italy, and then in the Mediterranean. However, they seemed to have conquered and peopled half the world in a fit of absence of mind, and the acquisition of these overseas territories had opened a Pandora's box of unforeseen domestic problems. From around the late 2nd century BCE, Rome started to implode in a series of violent internal struggles. The year 63 BCE. In the midst of those struggles, the year 63 BCE, or the consulship of Gaius Antonius and Marcus Tullius Cicero, as the Romans called it, was a critical one for the history of the world. And not purely because a child was born in that year who would become the first emperor of Rome. The situation that Rome was in often elicits comments of the history is always repeating itself variety. There was a domestic crisis centered around debt and credit. Recent elections had been sullied by bribery, corruption and political sleaze. The world's superpower to the west had recently witnessed the demise of one in the east, but had just become embroiled in troubles with people living in what are now Iraq, Iran, Palestine, Israel, Syria and Lebanon. Arabs were fighting with Jews. Jews were fighting among themselves. And Rome was struggling not only to keep all this under control, but, on the domestic front, desperately needed to reconcile the competing interests of a number of very powerful personalities, the state and the people. At the heart of this was an up-and-coming politician called C. Julius Caesar, who belonged to an aristocratic family that traced its descent to Aeneas and the goddess Venus. Caesar had a particularly good year in 63 BCE, managing not only to get himself appointed Pontifex Maximus, chief priest, but also, thanks to some lavish and well-targeted bribery, securing Rome's second highest elective office, the praetorship, for the following year. He wasn't yet best riding the world like the colossus he was to become, but his career was definitely on an upward trajectory. The real big beast of Roman politics that year was Cn. Pompeius Magnus Pompey. His meteoric rise to power and fame had violated many of Roman politics' most hallowed protocols. He was both too young and unqualified for the posts he held, but he had successfully solved a number of Rome's nagging issues. In 67 BCE he had been appointed to eradicate the Mediterranean's endemic pirate problem. This was not a case of the odd swashbuckling, parrot-wearing buccaneer. Entire communities were involved, and even Caesar had once been captured by pirates. However, the legislation that granted Pompey the wherewithal to take on the pirates made his opponents feel uneasy about the potential security ramifications. Even though Pompey himself was a good choice for the job, he ended up with 500 ships, 125,000 troops, numerous high-ranking subordinates, vast financial resources, and a 3-year imperium command, whose power applied throughout the Mediterranean and extended 80 kilometers inland of its coasts. Pompey justified his appointment not only by defeating the pirates in just 3 months, but by putting them into rehab and attempting to repair some of the desolation caused by the fighting. He was so successful that many pirates actually turned towards agriculture and depopulated areas were reinvigorated. The following year Pompey had been given the command versus King Mithridates VI of Pontus on the southern coast of the Black Sea, whom Velleius Paterculus described as ever eager for war, of exceptional bravery, always great in spirit and sometimes in achievement. In strategy a general, in bodily prowess a soldier, in hatred of the Romans, a Hannibal. Mithridates had been a thorn in the eastern side of Rome's interests ever since he had imprisoned his mother, killed his younger brother, married his sister and taken the throne in 120 BCE. Pompey's imperium was probably upgraded to my use, and he certainly had the hugely significant power of making war and peace on his own initiative. Cicero, whose speech survives, spoke in favor of the measures, and by 63 BCE Mithridates was blockaded in the Crimea. Albeit still alive and taking a daily regime of antidotes to safeguard himself from would-be poisoners. One significant knock-on effect of this conflict was to sour Rome's relations with the Parthian kingdom, which at its greatest extent stretched from the Euphrates to the Indus, thus encompassing both modern Iraq and Iran. With its capital at Ctesiphon, near what is now Baghdad, its king, Phraates III, felt short-changed by Pompey for the help he had given him in dealing with Mithridates. Another ramification of the Mithridatic Wars was Rome's annexation of Syria, once the focal point of the proud and mighty Seleucid kingdom, carved out of the remains of Alexander the Great's empire by Seleucus Nicator. However, the Seleucid Empire was now merely a faded memory, and Syria was ravaged by extortion and war. It was ripe for picking. Pompey marched through the region imposing order and discipline, giving the Syrian king Antiochus XIII Asiaticus short shrift at a meeting at Antioch, modern Antakya, Turkey, annexing his territory to secure it from incursions by Jews and Arabs, and ultimately bringing Syria under Rome's direct rule. Egypt, under the dissolute, arrogant king Ptolemy XII Neos Dionysos, whose addiction to music had earned him the derisory title of Auletes, flute player, was now the only surviving autonomous remnant of Alexander's empire. In 63 BCE Pompey had made his way into Judea, where he got involved in the Hasmonean civil war. Two brothers, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus, were contesting the Jewish throne. Pompey seemed to back Hyrcanus, and Aristobulus ultimately withdrew to Jerusalem. When Pompey had reached Jericho in his pursuit, he received news of the death of Mithridates. Faced by a rebellion from one of his sons, the old king had taken poison. But since the daily antidotes had pretty well immunized him, a loyal servant duly dispatched him, providing the inspiration behind the famous verses written by A. E. Housman in A Shropshire Lad. I tell the tale that I heard told. Mithridates, he died old. Things now moved quite quickly in Judea. Aristobulus fortified Jerusalem. Pompey laid siege to it. Aristobulus was arrested when he tried to negotiate. Further internal strife arose among the Jews. As the factions of Aristobulus and Hyrcanus were confronted by those who wanted a theocracy. The Psalms of Solomon represent the Roman conquest as the reward for Jewish impiety. The 3-month siege of Jerusalem ended with horrendous bloodshed. Pompey desecrated the sanctuary of the temple, although he didn't plunder it. Hyrcanus was established as high priest, but not king. And Pompey made his so-called Eastern settlement. Pompey had exceptional organizational skills, and his Eastern settlement of 62 BCE laid the foundations for the later Pax Romana in the region by means of a 3-faceted arrangement that involved creating a virtually continuous ring of provinces from the southern shore of the Black Sea to Syria, Palestine, founding about 40 new cities, and organizing and promoting independent client states as a kind of firewall outside the ring of provinces. On the whole, the new cities began to flourish, bringing Rome a 70% increase in revenue from the region. The client states, many of whose rulers owed their position to Pompey, were nominally independent and maintained friendly relations with Rome in an arrangement modeled on that between a high-ranking Roman patron, and his clientes. Dependents. Pompey's administrative talents were indisputable. But what really mattered to Rome was that he was a conqueror. He was now an incredibly powerful man. He received divine cult on Delos. His eye-watering wealth made him the richest man in Rome. Kings were in his debt, both literally and figuratively. His client base encompassed individuals, cities, provinces and kingdoms, and he commanded vast military resources. Throughout this period, Pompey's interests back in Rome had been promoted by M. Tullius Cicero. Cicero was a novus homo, new man. In other words, from a family new to the political scene at Rome. A man like Cicero could regularly enter the lower echelons of the political hierarchy. But he had his heart set on holding the consulship, Rome's highest elective office. This was an incredibly ambitious aspiration. Every Roman citizen could vote in this election, and also on legislation in Rome's assemblies. But they were all male, had to do so in person at Rome. The Romans therefore had a direct democracy, rather than the representative systems that most Western democracies now use. And this had worked effectively enough while Rome was just a small town. But in Cicero's time, many Roman citizens couldn't exercise this right because they didn't live anywhere near Rome. There was no local voting. So Cicero would have to go to Rome and canvass personally, and do so in the toga candida, a specially whitened toga that gives us our word candidate. He could expect vigorous political opposition, and indeed was warned in the pamphlet known as the Commentariolum Petitionis, short guide to electioneering, to expect deceit, plots, vice, arrogance, stubbornness, malevolence, pride, hatred and betrayal. The underlying reason for this atmosphere was that Rome had become the venue for ruthless power struggles between factions within a ruling elite that Cicero was trying to break into. Thank you for listening. To get more audiobooks, please subscribe our channel.